Morning, Koto. So the first presentation we've got this morning is about the solid waste or resource recovery activity that we've got in council, and I am going to hand over to Alec McNeil to do it because he's much more informed than I am.
Good morning, everyone. I guess what we'll start with is we'll take the plan as read. I'll just give you some context for the sort of the national context, the legislative framework we're in. Obviously, we've got the election coming up in October, so that will change the makeup of the government, whatever shape that takes. But there is some work in train with the ministry, which is basically a review of the Waste Minimisation Act and the Litter Act, which will have implications for our long-term planning. There's also a number of product stewardship schemes that are in train at the moment, which are working their way through the design process. And obviously, product stewardship is about a whole life responsibility for materials that are introduced into the market. Up till now, that process has been voluntary, and it's relied on industry schemes to set up collection and recovery schemes based on brand owners and parts of that supply chain contributing a levy. But going forward, the government would like to see that be more of a systemic change. That'll obviously impact on our curbside services because it affects the amount of material that might be in the physical collection system. The government did push forward a couple of changes in the waste strategy that was introduced in March. So that was predominantly about an emphasis on organics being taken out of landfill. Obviously, Christchurch well ahead on that front because we've been doing that for a number of years. The drivers behind that are twofold. One is to get access to that organic material as a resource and not lose it to landfill or elsewhere in the environment. But it's also about an emission profile impact. So it's about changing that process of collection and dealing with that material, and that should improve the emission profile of the material flow. And that's the same for all waste. The key driver going forward is not just service delivery and how it resonates with the community, it's also the emission impact and what it does for climate change. I'll just keep going at pace. If you've got any questions, then by all means just jump in.
No, we don't do that. It's not wise because
Okay.
You'll never get to the end.
All right, okay, sorry.
We'll do them all at the end.
Right,
So we'll go to the end and then we'll open for questions.
So in terms of the election, we don't anticipate any major changes to this policy approach. There might be debates about the delivery, but most of these pieces of work are in train. The other piece of legislation that is sitting deferred at the moment is the container return scheme, which is obviously a scheme designed to collect beverage containers. And again, that has a crossover impact with curbside because effectively it would reduce the amount of material collected at curbside, but it also makes those containers much more valuable than just a tonnage rate because they now have a deposit value attached to them. They have a handling fee attached to them as well. So there needs to be a strong interaction with councils about how that scheme would be implemented, what implications it would have for us. What we want to avoid is our services or our assets being stranded by a new scheme being started and then, for example, a resource recovery centre not being part of that. So again, that's something that has been deferred until 25. Most of the parties are favourable for the container return scheme, but they've just got a different worldview on how it could be implemented. So the next area I'll just talk about in general is what we deliver. I mean, effectively, we've got a combination of assets that we provide for the community to access, and they're provided on an equity basis, so anybody can access the infrastructure. It could be transfer stations, it could be recycling points. The curbside is obviously a targeted service, but it covers the whole residential part of the city as well. And obviously we fund those activities through a combination of general rates, targeted rates, grants, donations, and obviously we've got our share of the waste disposal levy, which is the tax that we pay for every tonne that we send to landfill, and we get some of that money circumvented back to us through the Ministry for the Environment. And how we spend that levy is set out in our waste plan, and at the moment the government have indicated that although the levy's gone from $10 a tonne to $60 a tonne by July next year, they will still leave councils with roughly a 50% share of that income stream. But obviously that monetary value has increased significantly. So we need to be able to demonstrate through our waste plan that we've got an effective plan for using that funding. The other things that obviously we provide are services. So the curbside service is obviously one of the main systems. We're also we employ the likes of EcoCentral to run the transfer stations. They have other facilities where you can drop off household goods. They have a shop that they've started off their own sort of volition, and this allows the community to get rid of bulkier materials and other materials that they couldn't necessarily put in their wheelie bin. And one of the things we're interested in going forward is how can those services be expanded to resonate more with the community. So if you take an example of inorganic goods or bulk goods, furniture, household items, at the moment we've got some recovery but not a large volume of recovery there. So a couple of things that we're interested in going forward is getting contract alignment to 2029 so that we can then go to the open market with a complete offering, and that will give the biggest opportunity and the best opportunity to the market. That can be presented in the form of options. So you could bid for part of the work or you could bid for all of it. A consolidated contract comes with some advantages that it allows the winning party to maximise their efficiency and the movement of people within the system. But it does make it one name that delivers all the services. So there is a potential sort of reputational risk there because there's only one company potentially involved. So what we're going to do is we've got a domino effect here. We need to get the outcome of the OPP, the organics processing plant. So we need to find out where that lands through the procurement process. That will then determine the availability of the land bank out at Bromley and what that could be used for in the future. And that would include considering that land bank for internal departments. So it could be the parts department, relocating a depot there, but it could also be for waste-related activities at that site. But again, we need to be clear to the Bromley community that these wouldn't be waste-related activities that would result in odour or other impacts on their amenity. It might be more to do with processing of bulk materials or furniture or repurposing of household goods. So it's not really a processing plant, it's more a land bank that would allow us to repurpose a wider range of materials. Obviously, the waste plan at the moment is it's operative and it started in 2020. That plan normally runs for 6 years, but it can change depending on what happens during the life cycle of that plan. But what we're effectively setting out in the first 3 years of the LTP is that year 1 would be planning, year 2 would be procurement, and year 4 through to year 10 would be implementation. So we need to develop the master plan for the transfer stations and what we're going to do with the OPP site once it becomes available. We then need to go into a procurement phase to quantify those numbers and refine them. At the moment, the LTP's got indicative numbers, but they'll need to be tested with the market. And then from year 4 onwards, it would be a case of working with our contracting parties and just determining how we would phase any redevelopment of the sites. The transfer station sites are quite, they're long-term established. They've not had a significant change for a number of decades. So what we've done at those sites is we've added in additional services over the decades, but they're now at a stage where they do need a redevelopment to place an emphasis more on resource recovery rather than on rubbish disposal. So the sites were initially set up as refuse transfer stations and they were very effective at that. And we've kind of grafted on the resource recovery aspect, in the sort of 20 or 30 years since then. We now need to flip that emphasis and make resource recovery the paramount sort of experience that the public have. And we want them to be a sort of a shared experience that is common. So whatever site you go to, the layout is similar and familiar. So it makes it easier for the public to access those sites and use them. I'll just talk briefly, I'll just scroll through and talk about the assets and the services. So I think we've touched on some of this. I think the key issue here is that we want the transfer station experience to be seamless for the public. We want them to be able to drive in and logically get rid of their materials in a manner that doesn't impact them. And eventually, if they've got rubbish left, then that's the last port of call and they get rid of it. At the moment, quite a lot of people just head straight for the pit. put it into the rubbish pit, and we lose access to a lot of materials. And it's really hard to recover materials from the pit situation. There's safety implications, and just the quality of material has been compromised. So if we can improve the traffic flows, set it out logically, so you get rid of all the material that doesn't, in theory, cost you anything. Everything costs. There's a price for everything, but some things don't have a gate fee, whereas the rubbish side does. Then what that'll do is that'll allow us to get the public to do the work on our behalf, to do the separation on the site. We then can make sure that what we're asking them to separate, we put that through a process of ensuring that we've got an end market demand for it. We understand what that end market wants from us, and then we can set up the collection system on site to reflect that. What we've done historically is collect, create a stockpile, and then try and find a home for the stockpile. So we need to reverse that thinking and actually go to the market first, determine what that end outlet wants and what shape, size and format they want the material in, and then build the system back from that. So that'll all form part of the long-term planning. The other assets I wanted to touch on, they're not really assets, they're more liabilities, and that's the closed landfills. So we have a number of landfills around the district, around the city, and out in the Banks Peninsula. And, you know, these are historical legacy items which we will be developing during this long-term plan. We'll develop a closed landfill management plan, which basically will set out where the sites are, what their current status is, what the projected capital expenditure could be in the future. If, for example, they have a piece of infrastructure that might need renewed, it could be a seawall, it could be a bridge that accesses the site. But what we'll put these sites under is a monitoring regime, a sort of physical watch on the site, but also it could be some technical sampling as well of, you know, water or ground conditions or whatever. And then that will then spin out into remediation actions as and when required. Historically, we've sort of been reactive in this space. So a storm event's come in, it's caused damage to a site, and then we've had to react to that and fix it. What we're trying to propose in this plan is that we'll actually have contingency built into the budget. The delivery dates year on year might change depending on the nature of what happens, but that capital can be carried forward or brought forward if we need to. But at least we're signalling through the LTP process that there's a potential cost and a liability there in the system. I guess the key challenges and focuses, when you're looking at something like the closed landfill management, it really is, we just got to keep an eye on them on a regular basis, physically walk the site at least a couple of times a year, physically walk the site after each storm event or weather event. And then we can draw in the technical support we need if we spot something physically on site that's a problem. In terms of the areas of focus, as I mentioned already, the transfer stations, we want to really convert them into being, instead of refuge transfer stations, the resource transfer stations. So they become the hub and spoke, if you like, of the network. The other thing, if we think about somewhere like Park House historically serviced a certain section of the community. Post-earthquakes, when the housing transitioned out of the city and moved to the west, we still have a lot of people coming into the city and still accessing Park House as their drop-off point. So Park House really is quite landlocked. There's not really a lot of space on that site, but there are potentially some options around the site that might be worth exploring. So we will speak to the relevant property owners or property developers and just see what options are available. But really what we need is space. But that'll form part of our strategic planning in that first sort of year to 18 months of the LTP. I guess that's probably the main, the main risks, I think, are having predictable capital spends, understanding the state of our assets, understanding the operational implications in the OPEX budget, and that just needs time. So we just need to take this year to 18 months to get the planning right, and then that'll set the strategic direction for the next 10 years. And then obviously we'll update that each annual plan and do a more detailed reset every 3 years when the LTP comes up. So that's probably enough for me. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right.
So shall I summarise it real quickly? From my point of view, the big focus for this team is definitely on planning and really doing the detailed long-term planning that is needed. but also to align our contracts so that we can have a really solid re-tender when they come up for renewal in 2029. But the planning for that procurement process will be a very long and detailed one. So it will be probably a 3 or 4 year process leading into that piece of procurement. And then, of course, it's working through, don't forget, we're working through the procurement process and then the implementation of the organics processing plant solutions.
So it seems to be that there's a lot of unknowns here that we've got to try and
that's
set a
what
budget.
that's why we're trying to set up a program that allows us to be nimble and adapt to what's needed, because we've identified those key challenges of the transfer stations and the management plans and the closed landfills. So
I think just one other thing there as well, if we're going to make systemic changes, then that's better to occur when we change contracts. When we're in contract, we can trial things, we can do proof of concepts, we can trial ideas and sort of fail quickly and learn the lessons. But a strategic change, for example, the fate of glass going forward for curbside, that's something that you need to do the planning for now and then reflect that in the new tender. You can't really change that in stream because we're married to the system that we've got at the moment, and there's a sunk investment in that system. So if we wanted to change something like that, and it also gives us time as well to respond to these changes coming through from government with these various product stewardship schemes, because it may well be that by the time 29 comes around, there's a lot less material in the curbside wheelie bin to actually collect. So that would also inform our thinking as to how we set that tender and contract framework up for the market to respond to.
Right, okay. Right, we've got a few questions here. So we'll start off with Mark, then Sarah, Tim, Tyler and Kelly. Have I missed anyone?
Thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive update there.
You got your microphone on, Mike?
Yeah, microphone's on.
Oh, thank you.
Just can't reach it.
Sorry.
I heard you just talking there about the inability to do anything around glass in the next 5 years. Is that how I heard that?
No, I wouldn't say it's an inability. I would say that to change the system, to change it at a system level, you can't do that when you're in contract. You need to wait until the contract resets. That doesn't mean to say that there couldn't be work done on glass in the time that remains. And if we are heading towards a different system with the public, then there could be processes and trials that we could set up that would start to get the public thinking along different lines than just, potentially putting it in a commingled bin. But you wouldn't be able to do it at scale just now. It wouldn't be feasible, and it would be too cost prohibitive.
Right, because I know I'd certainly be interested to explore the possibilities there, rather than see another 5 years of glass being basically crushed and put on roads. If we could find a way of better recycling that material, I think there would be something to
the other thing, though, to understand, and this did come through in the glass report that came to you, is that, and Alec did mention it as well, is to understand exactly what is going to happen from a legislative procedure from government. And that's been the container return scheme has been deferred to 2025, which isn't very far away, really. And so it's a balancing act all the time. So it's trying to balance that. Any expenditure that we undertake with what potentially could be legislated by government.
Okay. And just another point, is there any way to look at large item or inorganic collection days around the city in the long-term plan?
So you're thinking there about bulk inorganics, like household furniture, that sort of thing?
Just to try and get on top
I think one of the opportunities is to look at what could we use the Bromley Land Bank for. And if you look at the Auckland example, they established warehousing facilities pretty early on in that collection system, and then they used that as a hub for the community groups to then feed off that material that was collected. So the short answer is yes, something could be done in the short term as a trial. I think some of the lessons learned from other councils' experience is that you've got to differentiate between this activity being a revenue generator and being a matching needs. So, if a household's got bulk furniture they need to get rid of, and somebody else in the community has got a requirement for bulk furniture, how do you connect those two parties rather than just do it through a revenue generator? Because not everybody can access a shop or turn up with a trailer or a bulk van to collect this stuff.
Yep.
And I think the need is growing in the community in terms of the renter market, the cost of living, that there is, you know, if you could preserve that furniture in a sort of coordinated and sort of controlled manner, I think there would be huge demand for that. But we need space, and that's why we're sort of thinking that the OPP site might be the type of place that you would make that a base for. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Sarah?
Thanks so much. On the closed landfill management, many of these sites are in sort of ecologically sensitive areas by waterways, those kind of things. What work's being done with local rūnanga to see what their priorities are when it comes to closed landfill management?
Yeah, I think that if we establish this closed landfill management plan, then that will form part of that discussion, and that it gives you then the basis of what the plan should be, and then we can take into account all the views of the affected parties and determine what the driving ethos is as to what we want to do. We've got to be able to make the case and explain on an individual basis the consequence of any decision. So if the consequence was, for example, let's remove the landfill, that's always an option. But again, we've got to understand the financial implications of that, the practicalities of it, moving it from A to B. So I think part of that research and part of that discovery would be to understand the significance of these various parts of land to iwi and
I think that's the point. It's that discovery and early engagement before we come up with anything is the key, rather than
that's what we're doing at the moment. But that's what we're doing at the moment.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that is part of
checking.
it. But that will inform that, and it's part of the conversations that are happening at the moment.
Great.
Just identifying them, all of the sites, is a good start.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. We're kind of dealing with the end product. And I know that in Europe, there are some countries that are really pushing and doing this now with regards to restricting or taxing those products coming into the country. They have lots of plastics and lots of glitzy stuff. And in some of these countries, that you have the right as a purchaser to actually unwrap your joyous little piece of kit and leave all the crap at the store, which still leaves it in the country. I guess legislative-wise, are we doing any work with LGNZ and pushing central government to start taxing and restricting? Because we're only a little country and there's only so many holes we can dig.
Yeah, I think that the main legislative tool that the government's pursuing at the moment is the product stewardship legislation. So that's part of the Waste Minimisation Act. And obviously the Act's the primary legislation. And then what would happen is, as the individual schemes drop out for a product or a range of packaging, then they would bring in bespoke regulations which would set out the requirements of the scheme. And I think ultimately what you're trying to do here is change the mindset. At the moment, what you've got is an economy that waste is priced into the economy, and it's the economy that creates waste. Whereas resource recovery is not priced into the economy at the moment, and it falls back generally to the ratepayer or to councils to fund that. So what you would change is, and it also has a behaviour pattern where you're transferring responsibility around the supply chain. So it's kind of like the person left holding the package is the one then responsible for it. In a stewardship economy, that changes. Everybody who's involved in the handling of that material gets compensated appropriately through a levy-based system. But the starting point is actually to have a conversation about the material in the first place and say, you know, does it have a recovery pathway? And we're not trying to prevent people from putting products onto the market, but what you're doing in that policy setting is that you're revealing your consequence of your product's life cycle assessment in its price. So at the moment, single-use consumable, non-repairable is the cheapest, whereas and sustainability is sort of sold as a premium. A stewardship economy reverses that, and what you have is, you know, some things are just priced out the market because there's just no recovery pathway, or they have a material recovery pathway to link in and get them back to whence they came, so that we preserve those resources and keep them in circulation a lot longer. So that whole legislative framework is in train at the moment, and we'll just have to wait and see what the new government's view on that is and how they want to react to that. But it is an opportunity for business to commercialize some of these activities and turn them into a profit. So it's not an anti-business thing. It's really just more about resource efficiency and reflect it in pricing.
You know, I do think that as a council, it'd be good to have a discussion about that, because and what we lobby for, you know, through LGNZ, because it's actually technically the product's one issue, the wrapping is another, and that's actually.
So add our voice to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yep,
thank you
got
very
that.
much. Cheers.
Great. So Tyler.
Kia ora. I've got two questions. The first one is just in curiosity, is around the financial risk of the unit, and what projects within this work plan that you've got are the most financially going into the long-term plan?
Yeah, I think the highest risk profile are the closed landfills, because there's an element of unknown there and there's an element of uncertainty. So what we can do there is by giving that management framework, that planning framework, then one, we've identified the potential scale and the spread of the problem. And then secondly, we've put contingencies into the system. So we're budgeting for something that may or may not happen in the next 10-year cycle. But again, it's the impacts of climate change, the impacts of severe storm events that could be the biggest risk for us, because depending on the scale of that damage, the capital budgets that we've allocated may not be enough. But at the moment, we're just putting in provisional amounts, and then we'll refine those amounts each year as we get more information about the site. And we're trying to make it more, as I said, we're trying to regard these risks as assets. So we're trying to maintain them as assets. So rather than waiting until something fails and then repairing it, we would have a programme of maintenance that would look at a seawall, for example, and it would have a regular replacement programme rather than potentially waiting until the thing was washed out. So
that proactive maintenance you're talking about.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, but that just takes time, takes knowledge. And I think go back to the point raised earlier on, you want the ethos of the plan to be determined by key players in the community, so that we have a framework to which we're operating on. Yep. And once we've got those objectives and that criteria set, then we can get into the mechanics of what the management plan actually looks like. But it's that ethos initially, which is pretty straightforward. It's to protect the surrounding environment and the surrounding land from an adverse impact from a pollution trail from these sites.
And the waste unit seems like a pretty consistent unit around finances, right? There's very little fluctuation in that space. Am I correct?
I mean, most of our challenges at the moment are with cost of living. So most contracts have an escalation mechanism. The contractor obviously prices the work, and it could be 5, 10, 15 years later in that contract. So they need a mechanism in the contract to keep up with inflation.
Okay.
So any changes that affect the overall cost of inflation, which for our industry tends to be labour, transport, investment, return on investment ratios, then that manifests into a cost of living increase. And that's been running anywhere between 5 and 10% over the last couple of years. But again, our budgets tend to be a year lagging by a year, but we make that adjustment each year. So we know what those adjustments are, and then we pick that up and then reflect that forward. And we've got two choices. We can recover that through gate fees or user pays rates or targeted rates if we have them, or you can do it through general rates as well. So we're not blind to situations. The most recent experience you had was in the collapse of the commodity market for recycling, and that if you like, revealed the limitations of that contract framework, and then we had to step in and provide additional funding there to support that contractor. So there is anything that relies on commodity pricing is a risk, because you've no control over that pricing. But I think most assumptions now is that there's actually no money in recycling in terms of the resale of the product. So we've downscaled our budgets to reflect that. So we're not anticipating the sort of recycling levels that we maybe got 4 or 5 years ago. They're just not going to come back, because there's an oversupply and the price is depressed at the moment. It's unlikely to rise again.
Okay, makes sense. Excuse my ignorance, it's just for clarity. So you guys are in the game of medium termism, which is between 10 to 15 years for contracts that handle waste, and occasionally, year by year, you reassess the contracts and make it keep up with the cost of living and inflation.
Yeah, there's a clause in the contract that does keep it up. So 10 to 15 years on a contract basis is reasonably long-term contract, and they do need to adjust over time. So that most contracts will have escalation clauses in them that require us to recalculate the rates annually.
And we recalculate it, not them.
Yeah.
That sounds
There's a calculation in the contract that you use. So you take a transport contracts, we use an agreed calculator that all the industry uses. So yeah,
sounds like good fun.
it's great.
The last question, really quick. Sorry, Pauline. Is around that mana whenua thing.
Yeah.
Are you going in pre-draft, or you?
Yeah, we're already talking to them.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
We haven't started drafting. So I think
That's
the big thing from all of those questions is, yeah, we've got risks and we've got cost risks across, but that's why we want to really consolidate and do some really solid planning over the next couple of years to make sure that that's all there. But all of the conversations we're having with mana whenua at the moment are also I'm at the bulk.
Thanks.
I've been at the bulk of those, so we're raising that.
Good to
Thanks,
know
Alan. Cheers.
that we're planning. Now we've got 3 more, Kelly, Tyrone and Sam. Have we got time for 3 more questions, Lynette?
Actually, Mark kind of asked my question about glass. So
Okay, so we'll go straight.
So
to
you've still got about
Tyrone?
15 minutes.
I've just got some small interconnecting questions. So just
How
on,
many?
well, 3-ish. So just on the glass thing, right? So I'm kind of interested in this. Like, so in Queenstown, Lakes District, like they have glass they collected all like in its own bin, right? And then it gets all shipped off to Christchurch and it gets crushed up and then it goes to Auckland, right? That's the journey of the glass from Queenstown. Does our glass do the same?
No.
What does it do?
So the glass is bought. Glass in Christchurch is crushed and used as a fill.
Right. Sorry, you probably said that before, but I'm just
Yeah. So there is a we have done quite an extensive report on glass out previously.
Right.
And there are a whole lot of considerations against that need to be taken into play against the costs and changes of changing to a glass out type system. So and that includes the legislative changes that are planned with the container return scheme.
Right. I mean, it sounds like frighteningly expensive what Queenstown do then.
Yes.
It is. Okay, cool.
Yep.
So just on that, might be quite good to recirculate that.
Recirculate that glass out report.
Yeah,
Yes,
would you
we
mind?
can do that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just another QLDC related question. So Wanaka Wastebusters, right? Like, so that's a social enterprise that sort of like has got a zero waste mission and it's got the transfer station there in Wanaka as well. Like, is there any room? Do we have anything like that in Christchurch? I don't think so, not off the top of my head.
Yeah, look, the not-for-profit sector is interesting. My advice or my comment would be that all interested parties have their worldview and they try and frame the system to suit what they want to achieve. To give equity to everybody in the system, it's by making it into a stewardship approach where you take away that transfer of responsibility sort of mentality. In terms of who you employ as your contractor, there is a line of thought that says, if you employ a zero waste group, a community orientated group, they'll deliver a different type of service to maybe a commercial operator. But I think you can temper that by saying it's how you frame the contract. It's what you want from the contract. If you want community outcomes or repurposing outcomes or whatever you set the contract framework up to be, then people will respond to that. Market respondents will come in and they will be able to deliver to it. So there is a model in Auckland where they've been running these community recycling centres and they've reset that a couple of times. Their initial goal was to make them self-funding with no council money, but they've not quite achieved that. But they are getting reasonably high recovery rates. But people like EcoCentral or other groups are capable of achieving that as well. So it doesn't mean because you're operating with a commercial imperative, you can't deliver good community outcomes. At the end of the day, they employ people locally in our market, and it's how they respond and interact with the residents on the site and what the contract is incentivising them to do. So the Wastebusters and all these sort of people, the Raglan and Zero Waste, they all have their place in the system. And the key would be, if you want to draw them into bidding for the work, you've got to set up the framework that would attract them in the tender process.
Okay, I'll leave it there, but that's an awesome answer and I really appreciate that. Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, Alec, your answers are absolutely brilliant. And Sam?
Hey, thanks very much. Really good really good presentation. Just around the customer or community satisfaction. I mean, am I right in thinking that's a contractor issue in terms of the satisfaction with the bin collection?
Look, the contractor is us. Whoever we hire, it becomes council. So again, it's the you've got to. If we take the scale of the curbside, for example, we've got to have KPIs and metrics in the system that are fair and achievable and sort of usual smart objective type thing. But you've also got to have the context that problems will occur with that scale of service, and it's about whether that level of efficiency. If 20% of the customers were phoning up every week, complaining about the service level, then that's a huge issue. But where you've got at the moment, we track around between 3,000 and 4,000 calls a month into the resource recovery activity. Predominantly, they relate to wheelie bin management and just general issues to do with curbside. But to give that context, we've got 505,000 bins in system. So that 3,000 or 4,000 calls by bins is less than 1%. So I think, again, it goes back to the contract framework. You don't want unintended consequences in the contract. You want the KPIs to be set up such that they're easily measurable. They provide accountability, but our staff can actually check on them and
maybe,
access it as well.
Maybe put a different way. I'm just looking, and I know we've had the COVID period through 2021, and that's maybe the satisfaction potentially dropped when we did the bin change, what we're processing. But I guess looking back at 18, 19, it was 87%, and it's sort of come down, and it looks like it's on its way back up. I guess what I'm trying to understand is potentially what's changed with the contract, or how are we better managing it to make sure, because I know we put on another truck, didn't we?
Yeah, look, I think you've mentioned the event that probably is worth talking about for a couple of minutes. The COVID situation, the issue where we had the miscommunication, where people then started using the wheelie bins for large scale, they mixed them and put rubbish in them. So we had a period of nearly 18 months where there was hundreds of loads getting rejected every month at the Resource Recovery Centre because the loads were contaminated. And in response to that, we introduced some systems which involved, doing bin auditing, engaging with the public more in a sort of there's no other way to put it. It's more of a confrontational relationship, because we're behaving more like the regulator rather than an educator or informing people. So that will have impacted, and that will have flown through into the overall satisfaction. We've now come out of that phase. The public have got the quality back up. And we would anticipate now that satisfaction will rise. But the other thing with the satisfaction is you've got to be realistic about the target you set, because what can you actually do in practical terms to improve that satisfaction? There's many things that will contribute towards that. But I think in this situation with COVID, we changed the relationship with the public and we got an adverse reaction to that. That relationship is now reverting back to where it was pre-COVID, and generally now we're into single figures per month for rejected loads. Obviously, we're coming into the next busy season, and that might peak again. But we certainly seem to have crossed the hill here with getting the contamination levels right down. But any system that introduces, if you like, potential conflict between us and the community, most waste, this is why the synergy with being part of the transport department is useful, because when we get it right, we won't hear from the public, and they'll just embrace the system. When we get it wrong, we'll hear pretty quickly. And I think those customer satisfactions reflect the relationship we had with them in response to the contamination.
Yep.
Yeah.
So just, I hope it's not a dumb question, but if there was a bin, Yanni, I'll come to you, that the contractors rejected because it was overfull or whatever reason, and that person complains, does that become data against us?
It does. We track everything. So you can break that down. There's a dashboard within the Hybris ticket system, and we can give you a breakdown of that. There's
yeah, but would that affect our KPI? That's what I'm saying.
No, we can split it out, and we can split it out in the KPIs.
Okay, that's good. Yanni.
Thank you. I guess was quite interested to see if we're doing anything around e-waste, and also if we're doing anything around metal, tires, like just the stuff that we don't normally consider, but that causes a huge problem in terms of waste to landfill.
Yeah, so there's at the national level, there's for tyres, there's a product stewardship scheme called TyreWise. So they're in the and that's basically through the Motor Trade Association. It involves the tyre manufacturers, the distributors, the retailers, and they have a management group who run that scheme on their behalf, and they're hoping to give further details about the rollout and implementation of that towards the end of 2023. And that's in train, so that's unlikely to be reversed by any political changes.
I think, like, is there any work that we're doing around sort of regulation around it? Because I'm just mindful of where people store lots of tyres, the fire risk.
Yeah, so a couple of things have happened with tyres. There was a legislation introduced on the control of storage, so that we prevented the same situation where, you know, operator X stored 1 million tyres on the site and then folded the company, and then the regional or the local authority was left to do the cleanup, or the tyres went on fire. So from tyres, e-waste, there's another product stewardship scheme that was submitted to the ministry. It's going through the accreditation process just now. That was put in by a company called Tech Collect, who are based in Australia, and that'll be for a certain range of electronic, goods. It'll be mainly aimed at effectively anything that has a plug or a cable on it. There's separate schemes for batteries. So, I mean, the short answer is the legislative framework is there. A lot of these schemes are in train, but none of them have yet been accredited and actually mandated. So we hope in the next electoral term, they'll start to get pushed out. Once we know that the outcome of those schemes, then we'll then reflect that in our transfer station setups. We can do localised schemes, and that's one of the discussions that we'll have for the contract variation that we're discussing with the transfer station operator just now. How can we improve the range of materials that we're collecting? How can we set those schemes up? But we always want to be mindful of what the national scheme might look like, so we don't sink investment and then find it's wasted.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, in terms of asset condition, what sort of condition are the bins in? Like, over the life of the contract, who's responsible for replacing the bins? Is it the contractor? And how do we get revenue from that, or do we pay the contractor for bins, or the resident? Or?
So the bins belong in the contract model we have at the moment. The bins belong to the contractor, and they're responsible for the maintenance and the upkeep. It depends on the nature of the damage. Sometimes we will be liable for it. Sometimes the resident may get a bill.
At a high level, though, I'm just trying to understand, like, the bins must have a certain life.
Yep. Yeah.
And so there must be a kind of a big spike when we have to replace the bins. And who pays for that?
They're the contractors. They're the contractors. Contractors own them under the contract. They're the contractor's responsibility.
In general terms, the body of the bin is good for anything up to 20 years, and the consumables, the lids, the wheels, they all get repaired on an as-needed basis. But the structural body of the bin should last for a contract between 10 and 20 years.
Yeah.
And the only other thing, I just want, we don't seem to have any, in terms of our levels of service. I say we've got like the breaches. But I wonder if we need a better measure around things like complaints around things like odor, noise. I mean, I don't know what the exact measure might be, but it just seems a fairly blunt one, just to be compliant with the consent, but nothing monitoring the odor issues that we've had, given we've had so many.
The issue that is one part, but the reality of that in a lot of other sites that we run, we have consents. So it is the breach of the consents that is the measure that is measurable as such. And we've been through that in quite a bit of detail.
Thanks. I think we'll move on from that. And Sarah, did you have one last one? You're okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very comprehensive and interesting. Thanks, Alec.
Thank you very much.
Right. So brings us to Nigel. Morena.
Great. So I'll probably intend to flick through the report as per the instructions that it's taken as read, but I thought I'd just take the chance to highlight a few key things as we go through, and then obviously questions at the end. So of course, just going through in terms of for us, the Rec and Sport Community Arts and Events Unit, most of the stuff we're doing, there's no significant changes to our activity plan in terms of we've been rebuilding the network of facilities post-earthquake. We continue to do that, and there's no other significant changes in our activity plan as we work our way through. Obviously, the key things we do, there's 4 parts to our activity, which is one around providing a network of recreation and sporting facilities. We also provide recreation and sporting programs and activities within that, and we provide events, both from delivery, but also from the consenting process and providing support to event deliverers. And then we also have a community arts team that's working with the community and creating partnerships to deliver wellbeing through the arts. We know there's also a number of reports that goes through that talks about the value of the work that we do, whether it's about getting people active in terms of just for their own well-being. And there's a number of research papers, whether it's from Sport New Zealand, that talks about $1 investor gives you $2.12 return on social return on that, through to a number of reports through the creative sector as well. So I think everything we're doing currently has a significant impact on the community, and it's doing a pretty good job in that space. What I did want to probably cover off, and I guess this is a graph that's on the board that just gives a bit of a snapshot of how we've been tracking pre-earthquake to today. So I guess in terms of what you've got on this is about our aquatic participations. And the reason I wanted to talk to this was back in 2017, to inform that LTP, we went through and did an aquatic services plan, which was about making sure that all the business cases that have been done for the individual recreation and sports centres actually stacked up, so we had one single view of what it was going to cost to operate the full network of facilities.
Sorry, when was that, Nigel? What year?
It was about 2017. So it's been through a number of LTPs now, but I guess the thing is we're still tracking online with what we predicted at that time. So in terms of pre-earthquake, we had about 5.3 participations per head of population, and last year just gone, we had 5.48 participations per head of population. So we're tracking through nicely to be able to get the participations, but actually not just get new people active, but actually get people coming more often. So instead of coming once or twice, coming 3 or 4 times. And what you'll see through this in terms of, there's some spikes as you go through, but obviously the key ones is the earthquake, which is demonstrated by that red line. In 2011, we opened Graham Connon Recreation and Sports Centre. That's why there's that first spike as we jump up in participations. Then there was a long period of time where we didn't, we were sweating the assets down. People were coming, but it wasn't a great experience because we were really, really full and really, really busy. So in terms of, you had that gradual downward trend of participations in our aquatic facilities. People weren't quite going and getting the enjoyment and the space and being able to enjoy just using the recreation sports centres. Through to the big spike in 2017-18 is when Tairo Kiwi2 opened. So in terms of, we had another spike where people came in, but at the same time, we also had closed Pioneer for 6 months and closed the hot zone at Jelly Park, as we could no longer sweat those assets. And then in terms of, obviously, we had the COVID restrictions that hit as well. So that took a massive impact on participation, both through the close down, but also through the restrictions that were in place post that. And then coming out, obviously, Te Pou Toitoi Linwood Pool was open during that COVID time as well. So there's a little bit of a spike there. But I guess the good news is that now we're out in terms of, we're actually haven't been under any pandemic or any restrictions in terms of, we've got a full network of facilities. There seems to be a bit of space for people, and we're back up to that participation where we're tracking to get more and more. Even when we get Matatiki and Patakuri online, we're still going to have some closures at our other rec and sports centres, because we have still been sweating them and doing only the essential repairs since the earthquake. So there'll be a closure at Jelly Park for circa 8 months, and same at Pioneer and GC as we work our way through that. So I thought it was important just to track that we are heading to what we'd predicted would be when we're operating the full network of rec and sports centres. Apart from that, in terms of, I think the rest of it, we could probably leave as read, and then probably just open it up to questions if you want to. The key thing that we do have is through our unit is we're working in partnership. So in terms of not trying to do everything ourselves, but certainly trying to partner with community groups, partner with other agencies to deliver, whether that's through the arts, whether it's in terms of Rata or MB, or even with the parks unit to get Toi Awaha in terms of down at Rolleston House up, where there's 17 creatives currently operating out of that, through to the event delivery and partnerships with The Rock for events that they deliver. And then likewise, stuff that we're doing with variety to get people to learn to swim and working through that. One of the challenges we do have, and we'll continue to bring that to you, is fees and charges and making sure that cost isn't a barrier and how we manage that. So I think what you'll get back from us when we come to the table is probably trying to get a bit more flexibility about how we set those fees and charges, because obviously having them ready in December and they don't get implemented till probably the following October, setting them well in advance, the industry can change quite a bit. So we'll probably be asking for a bit of GM or head of unit discretion to be able to change those prices to react to what's going on so we can get people through the doors, but making sure that cost isn't a barrier and recognising that cost isn't the only barrier. That's why we're working with existing agencies to go through the other stuff, whether it's transport or social need and go through that.
Right, you ready for questions? Hang on, Mr. Holpole. So look, Mark was up first, then Tyler, Kelly, and then Yanni.
Thank you.
And Jake, did you have one? No. Okay, Mark and Sam. Yep.
Good to see the Maratiki coming into the planning here. I'd noticed on one of your slides there that it mentions financial year 25 for Maratiki. I would have thought perhaps financial year 24 with any luck.
Could be an error in that, yes. We'll pick that up and go through. I guess in terms of its opening at the in terms of that's just an error.
Yep, no, that's cool. I just hoped it wasn't put back a year like Parakiori. Then interesting to pick up on your comments there about working with third parties. And do we work in conjunction with third party swim schools and that sort of thing to sort of, rather than compete against each other in the space, work together to help the community get what they need?
Yeah, we do intend to go through. I mean, part of that is through the transport subsidy that we manage on behalf of the sector, intended to get schools to swimming pools, whether that's a council swimming pool or somewhere else. Yep. So certainly we manage that fund to work with other swim schools. And then in terms of through any other mechanisms we can, whether it's in terms of criteria or just lesson plans and those sorts of things, but definitely there's the working with them. But I guess sometimes we have different drivers, whether it's a commercial outcome versus our costs for learn to swim are very, very affordable and reasonable, and that's making sure everyone gets the opportunity for that fundamental skill.
Because I recently came across a third-party swim school who actually have a charitable trust to try and encourage people within that space of learning to swim and survive in water. Would that be something that we'd be interested in building into the program here?
Yeah, there's working through. I think there's a number of trusts that are around getting people active and making sure it's accessible. So yes, as we've spoken, we can have a conversation and work through.
Excellent. Thanks, Nigel.
Great, Tyler.
Kia ora, Nigel. I'm not going to ask what you think I'm going to ask. Just there is something that's close to in relation to that, and it's around accessibility for those with who are less abled. And there's been some things within the Riccarton community around accessibility into swim schools and one-to-one ratio teaching because they need more active coaching and engagement. What does council do in that space around disabled peoples and helping them be more skilled in the water, if you will?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that, and I'll answer both. But then I have got my team behind me that may jump in if I get things wrong. But I guess there's two parts. One is to make sure that our instructors are taught in terms of and that ongoing education to make sure they have the awareness and they know how to manage those situations. The other one is size of classes. So in terms of they can reduce the size of class to make sure that people have the attention they need. And then the third part is in terms of making sure that for some people, having those lessons at peak times is not helpful. So in terms of how we can do them at different times when it's a little bit quieter. And I think that's part of the benefit of the aquatic sensory when Parakiori opens is to be able to have a quieter space to deliver the swim lessons, but also to integrate them into the general noisiness of the busy times that we do have.
Gotcha. So those classes could be a part of the new program that you're proposing.
Yeah, there are classes as we work through in different times as we work through, and we have worked with the Halberg Foundation, Halberg before to actually help fund and support through that.
Okay, cool. There was another one around cost as a barrier, and I actually got approached from UC and UCSA around accessibility for their students and not being able to afford the adult rate. To save me from having to go through long-term plan stuff, would you be able to put a thought through around your pricing? They are going to put through a letter to the community board.
Yep.
To try and support that. But I just wanted to see if we're able to just skip a beat and see if you're able to put forward a proposed thought around some advice around what you think would be good for a student rate at UC.
Yeah, we can respond to that, and there's probably some work we've already done with UC previously. Was about we were looking to get a rate set rate, but I think where we landed was they were better off to use Whanganui, which was closer to the university.
Gotcha.
And they were using rates and they were using that facility. But we've got the
Gotcha.
advice, I can send that through.
There were two pools that they predominantly would use, which I've been talked to as Jelly Park, and because there's no housing in Riccarton, they actually live in Spraydon, so it would help with Pioneer potentially. So maybe a targeted rate could work, but just a thought. I didn't really want to put too much on it. Cheers.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. I've got quite a few questions, but I'll just restrict it. How's the behaviour at pools these days? You know, because it seems to oscillate at different times. I often talk to the lifeguards. Yeah. Have you noticed any trends?
It's an ongoing challenge to go through. Certainly, there's some people that have got things going on in their lives that they might bring out their frustrations, but it's an ongoing challenge for our frontline staff to manage and work with. Certainly, the Be Cool Not Cruel campaign was helpful, but I guess in terms of going through what's the next steps to work through that. So not only that, but actually how do we reward when our staff are doing a good job? But it's a difficult situation in terms of managing a number of different people that as they work through that. But it's tracking the same, but we've excluded a number of people from our facilities over the last 12 months.
Yeah, and my feedback would be that your front of house staff at QE2 and the GC, where I go regularly, are just top notch. You know, really good at sort of engaging people as they come in the door, which I think probably goes a long way to.
I think they do an amazing job in terms of certainly as we go through the training that they do receive about conflict de-escalation is fantastic. Yeah. But I guess in terms of as they get through small innocent query, getting it 20 times a day can become frustrating, but I think overall they do a great job.
And just another question, how close do we ever get to capacity at places like QE2, you know, which is
in terms of depends on a cold day and that sort of stuff. Yes, we are at capacity in weekends where it's 1 in, 1 out of the pools. Yeah. And I guess the difficulty with that is in terms of a number of people are using the leisure spaces. So they might say they're going to go and swim laps, but they end up in the leisure space. So it's a constant monitoring of lifeguards. So yes, we do reach capacity. Both there and Pioneer generally, and obviously in terms of Jelly Park over that summer period with the outdoor pool, it's really, really busy.
And do you think that's going to change when Parakora opens? Or, you know, it sounds like when you open a new pool, there's a big increase in people going to.
People go to the nice shiny things, but certainly in terms of what will provide us more options. So people can either go to their local facility or they can make their way into town to see Parakora, but certainly provide more options. But it'd be great if we were at capacity, and then we can just change the way we operate to try and encourage people to come at different times.
And just a final question around season pass holders, you know, who pay the big dollars, like 600 and something like that. Have you considered sort of lowering that? Because that's quite a big chunk of money for some people to pay up front. You know, I mean, I think twice about it. You know.
We have certainly in terms of when we do our fees and charges, we benchmark against other local government agencies around the country what they charge, and also the private sector. I think in terms of when you go through our memberships, we're actually maybe $150, $200 cheaper than others that are around. But I guess it's also going through where the community services discounts provided or the gold card, those sorts of things as we work our way through. But that is a consideration we take in.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Aaron and then Yanni.
A couple of questions just on Parakuri. What's the plan with the parking there? Is that going to be charged or is it free?
In terms of for those that are using the facility, in terms of it will be free, but I think there's going to be time limits on that. So if people choose to park there all day, then certainly they'll be paying a larger fee in terms to be there to go through. So there's actually been out to tender. There's a parking a system that's been awarded that allows us to track number plates to know how long people have been there. So certainly it's going to be one of the issues we do have. I think when we go back when Parakura was first decided it was going onto that site, there was a whole transport plan about how people would get there and what parking buildings are going to be in their location. Some of that hasn't come through, but it's going to be one of those things we're going to have to actively manage. And I guess that's also part of our how we reduce our carbon footprint, because one of the big things we have is how people travel to our facilities. So whether we can do some sort of incentives or encourage people to bike or take the bus and work through that, but it's going to be one of those challenges we'll have to work through.
Right. And does anything stop people, say you're going to visit someone at the hospital for 3 hours, go to Parakuri, pay for your swim, walk to the hospital?
I think we'll go through and monitor that, but that's one of the things we'll keep out for. If there's a constant pathway being treated over to the hospital, we'll work our way through, but knowing that they're probably doing that for good reasons, but it's something we have to manage.
And then, so just looking at the numbers here going forward, it looks like Parakuri has a cost increase on OPEX of 10 million a year over what we're currently spending. It's ballpark. Is that what I'm seeing here?
It's
I know it's hard to work it out, but
yeah, in terms of, it's probably better if we provide a breakdown. I think it's more the overheads and how they've been worked through, but certainly yes, in terms of Parakuri is going to have a significant cost to implement, to operate over and above the others. I think from memory, I think the net cost to operate Parakuri is about $3 million as we work our way through. It's probably just a bit of a jump through the system that we'll need to finalise.
Yeah, because under the funding percentages per year, our rates are currently 66% for rec facilities and 34% fees and charges. But it looks like once Parakuri is online, that actually rates amount goes down and the other goes up, which would say that we're going to have an increase of people going to rec facilities by about 30 to 40% looking at these numbers. Do we think that's going to be right?
What might be valid if I pick up the aquatics work that we did do and probably recirculate that, which is a better outcome of the participations in the numbers and the dollars that go with that.
Right.
If that's okay.
Yep, that'd be cool.
Thanks,
so
Aaron.
thank you.
Thanks, Yanni.
Just to pick up on the Parakuri, I think we have asked for a briefing to understand the revenue versus the costs and to get a really good understanding around things like fees and charges. There's obviously private people that are going to be operating within that building as well. So at this moment, I really don't have any sense of like what are people going to pay to use the facility. I've certainly heard some concern from some of the sporting groups that it may be too expensive, but it would be good to get a kind of understanding of that well in advance before we set the fees and charges through the LTP. Is there any sort of briefing that is going to be looking at like what leases we're doing, what the rates we're charging, how that offsets the cost of operation?
Yes, and I think last time we came, I think there was a request to come and give an operational briefing, so rather than just the construction, but to come and talk about how the facility will operate. I think we said we'd do that in the month of October, so we'll find a time in October to come and talk about the operational.
And then that can feed into the LTP decisions.
Yeah, it provides the overview of what we've got going on.
Is anything going to be done between now and October that's irreversible in terms of signing up leases, negotiating with people using it?
No, in terms of the facility, in terms of the plan to operate it, had been done and dusted. In terms of originally we were hoping to open in 2021. So those plans are kind of set and we're just adapting and working our way through those. So no, there's no significant change between now and then.
Just had two questions around very specific things, but what's happening with Wharenui, Paul, in this?
Certainly still working through with the Wharenui Club in terms of we talked about last time giving them the opportunity to operate their facility in terms of go through to see whether they could make it in terms of cost neutral or cost recovery. So still working closely with them. So I met with them last week to talk through the capital works that might be required. But then in terms of obviously once Parakuri is open, that will be a different proposition to now that it's not open. So we're still working with the club.
So, but in the LTP, which goes for the 10 years and Parakuri is going to open, what are we saying in terms of Wharenui? Are we going to close it? Are we going to suggest closing it? Are we going to suggest leaving it open?
In terms of, I think the direction we got from council last time they came was to see whether they could make a case where they could be cost neutral. And then in terms of we could come with the actual data and actual information about what it was going to cost to operate that facility. And then council could make a decision about how they wanted to go forward.
So currently the LTP is silent on what happens to Wharenui?
It is in terms of as we still don't have certainty on the opening date of Parakuri. So in terms of without having that, in terms of it's pretty hard to make a decision to go through or make recommendations there.
And then the key there is that you're working with Wharenui Hall Management Group.
Yeah. And then just the final specific question was around the Wigram Gymnasium. Is that something that needs to have some sort of refurbishment or building? I just don't quite know enough about its condition, but I know in the past there's been concern that it's sort of overcrowded and doesn't have enough space and might need improvements.
Yeah, we're still working our way through in terms of the Wigram Gymnasium. I think there's been a number of options where they were looking to expand to make it bigger, but I think the team that we have behind me in terms of to go through is working with the sporting organisation about what we can do. And of course, we'd always love to do more, but we're constrained by resources that we do have. So,
right, okay, Sam.
Yeah, hey, thanks. Really good presentation. Be really keen to see what that delegation looks like to the team around the pricing, because I think you a lot more in touch with sort of what that looks like. So that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Just one thing was around, so more of a logic test for me. Across our pools and things like that, are we getting enough revenue in to cover those sort of fixed costs, so to speak, across each pool? And it may be something we can take, you can come back with. I guess where I'm getting to is if we're sort of, my logic would sort of say, if we're getting enough in to cover the costs and the overheads associated with all the staff and things like that, then there may be more creative things we can do with the pricing to increase that participation. Is that sort of fair to say? And like an example would be, I'm thinking we have 3,000 council staff. I know we already do a bit of stuff, but actually does it make sense as a non-tangible or a tangible benefit that we don't necessarily pay for to increase that? Like just getting a bit more creative with using our asset.
Yeah, you're talking about just the pools.
Well, I guess across the asset base we've got in sport and rec.
Everything.
Yeah.
So maybe in terms of, if I leave that for when we, in terms of obviously, let us do the operational briefing for Patakuri, but also to come back around some thinking around the fees and charges, because I guess the team have looked at all different scenarios to make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
I guess one of the challenges we do have is some of those fixed costs like insurance in terms of it recently has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
So be able to manage that. So,
but it'd be really good to sort of, even if we just understand at a high level what the throughput in each facility is required to cover that fixed cost, and then what choices we can make, and it may not, knowing there's a rateable contribution as well, and then what we can do above and beyond that to add some benefit to the people using it, and whether it increases that participation. Because I completely get the idea of going from people using it twice a week to 4 times, but actually if we can get 2 people doing that, not 1, that's a financially good thing for the council, but also really good for them as well. So just be keen to see how that plays out.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we've got Tyrone. She almost turned.
So currently the Norman Kirk Memorial Pool in Littleton closes at the end of, closes in a commercial sense at the end of January. So what would it take to, and look, people can use it after that, but like they need a key and that costs, and so that's not necessarily inclusive. So what kind of options do we have to sort of like keep a pool like that open, like weekends, say, to the end of February? That's probably the first question. Yep. Yeah. So fine. What do you think of that?
I think the difficulty we have with all the outdoor summer pools is in terms of is the cost to operate. And I guess in terms of who would extend Norman Kirk Memorial Pool or Waltham or Jelly Park, it's a significant cost relative to the participations we receive. So I guess in terms of it, what we've done in the past, it's been a community board bid to try and keep their pool open, and they've worked their way through. But what we did do with Norman Kirk is tried to set up the pool key system so that people could access it, or the community could access it when they wanted without having to wait for lifeguards to work through, but obviously making sure that's safe. So that was kind of trying to extend the access to that facility without having to have council staff on site, but knowing that we had trained those key holders to be responsible, and if
which works well,
yeah,
but it costs.
Yeah. So if you're asking me to come through with options to what it would cost to do it, I mean, we could pull that together, but I guess it's additional money, and relative to some of the other priorities in terms of it might
have to be arranged too, depending on how many are using it, because it's another unquantified.
Yeah.
Guess when the weather gets
that's like Banks Peninsula all over, though. It gets discriminated against because it's got a lower population, doesn't it? So
no. Sometimes the more people that use it, the more it costs.
We can provide the information.
Okay.
I do have a follow-up. Nigel, just on the Governor's Bay pool. Like, now I understand that they do need an upgrade in their heat pump. Is that like, how does that sort of get dealt with? Is that hey mate? No. They sort of go together like a single percent. Anyway, let the man answer the question.
That's part of our capital plan to work through in terms of whether it needs to be replaced. So it'll be unfunded. It's just a matter of working out when it needs to be done.
Right. So is that's something that's on budget, or we need to get it on budget?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can go back and talk to the team to see where it sits in terms of through that and come back to you.
All right. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Okay, Tim. Apologies, I skipped you.
Yep, that's right. A couple of things. So RAT had changed its funding policy. Has that affected us at all? Because we tend to be the last one holding the bathwater, and it just seems there's a disconnect there, because people have come to us and a number of organisations saying they're no longer covered by Rata or others. So are we in the same boat there? Because you've just heard other councillors wanting things, which is absolutely fine for their communities. It all costs money.
I think in terms of a number of the funding agencies have worked through to prioritise where they're putting their money, in terms of whether it's targeted populations or things that they've prioritised that are important to them, whether that's Sports New Zealand, whether it's Rata Foundation, whether it's some of the philanthropics that are working their way through. Has it impacted us? Yes, in terms of some people that used to get funding for certain things may no longer get that, so they feel like they're missing out. But in saying that, the funding's gone to other areas that they've identified as being important for them. Okay. So yes, it does impact. So some people might need to miss out for others to get an equitable solution to getting through the facilities or whatever else Rata's funding.
It'd be good for us for that briefing that we're going to have in October to understand that better. Because, for instance, university was mentioned before. So Canterbury University is now the most popular university in New Zealand. So that's the recent figures, etc. They came to us over a rainbow gala, which the university wouldn't fund, which I think is appalling. But they came to us for funding. So I'm just wondering if the university students, could they get funding for their students to come and use our facilities at a discount rather than all the ratepayers and putting pressure on our other areas. I'm just wondering if there are organisations, whether it be Canterbury Rugby or whatever it is, can we kind of hit them for a full fee and they go and get to another organisation funding for that, whatever that is, lottery, whatever. Right, yeah, because we are the last cab off the block and we're coming to a long-term plan which we cannot afford. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, there's a few things in that. So I'll probably work with John Fussell and turn around the grants that we distribute and just to give an idea of in terms of what the requests have been over and above what's available to allocate. So I'll do that and that can come back through a forum.
Yep.
The other stuff through our fees and charges, yes, we do have commercial rates where some people pay a lot more than others if it's a commercial part of it, but we can explore those sorts of situations.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sure. In Victoria.
Thank you, Nigel. We're really putting you through your paces today. My first question is about risk. I'm really keen to understand at its simplest level where your biggest risk is over the next 10 years or so in terms of your capital program.
I think in risk of our capital program, we're fairly lucky because most of our facilities have been built new or they have had some repairs. If you start to go through, the biggest risk will be when we open Jelly Park and Pioneer, and I guess that's what we might find behind the walls that we weren't aware of before. So that's probably the biggest risk in terms of us fixing existing infrastructure.
My second question is about capacity. I'm just keen to understand that when our new facilities are up and running, whether we're going to have sufficient facilities to meet the demands. I'm thinking in terms of the current pressures that we're seeing particularly on our pool space and our lane space when we've got intermediate kids playing water polo at 9:30 and 10 o'clock at night. So are we expecting to be able to have sufficient facilities to meet our current demand and the expected increase in our population growth to meet the increasing demand?
Great question. Certainly go through. For that example, we're talking about deep water space for water polo. So certainly Paddy has a significant amount of deep water space, whether it's the 50-metre pool and the dive well. So that's a significant increase in that. So yes, we anticipate there should be. When we do go through and do the aquatics plan, we're not basing the facilities on what we need now. It's based on what we need in 30 years' time and work the way through it. And then the facilities have also got room for expansion if we need to. So yes, we believe there will be. In terms of there may have to be people that operate slightly differently as we get new facilities. One of those will be the likes of netball. In terms of if they become an indoor sport, then it might not be everything played on Saturday. They might have to do some midweek games, and they're working through that now with Netzel and then how that would operate to Paddy. So that'll be the case for every sport that goes through because we can't have everyone in the pool space at the same time. So it's just a bit of give and take, and they're working really well together.
That was the other question about how all our stakeholders are working well together. Are they?
I think what we find if we get them in the room and they're talking through the solution, then they're far more amicable because they're actually part of the solution as part of their ideas and they can get the trade-off. It's when we try and sit at the top and be the decision maker that we get ourselves into a spot of bother because all of a sudden it's council in the middle, but everyone's got the right outcome. They want people to be active more often and they've got their own sport in mind. But once they see the full picture, I don't think generally everyone works really well together. So we just need to probably change the way that we have done it traditionally, which is working with the sports and getting them as part of the solution.
That's really good to hear. My final question then is around prioritisation. We're hearing a lot about budgetary pressures and the need for prioritisation and all of our other briefings. So I'm just keen to understand whether you're expecting there to be any trade-offs in terms of what you're offering and your levels of service in your capital program.
Certainly we'll need to, but I think, like I said at the start, we haven't changed our activity too much in terms of it's been the plan for a while. I think we've been quite nimble with our budgets over the last 3 cycles, and where if there's savings, we've handed the money back, or we've tried to find efficiencies to do things. So we'll continue to do that. I think yes, there will be some trade-offs, and there will be some decisions for council about where you would like to invest the money, and for us that will mean we might have to stop some services.
You're not able to give us any heads up on what that looks like?
I mean, I think the options are endless in terms of go through. It depends where council wants to put its priorities. So in terms of rather than doing now, because effectively you could stop everything we do, but certainly that's not our recommendation, because we think that it adds value to people's well-being. So I think it'll be a myriad of things you could look through and decide whether it's important.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah.
Be more for Lynn and Mary and the team. It's just around, based off Nigel's comments, that'll come through driven off a staff recommendation though, won't it?
Yes, after Nigel's finished, we'll ask Peter to give you a heads up on the forthcoming briefing.
Great.
So that,
Yeah,
that will include the indicative timing.
Yeah, no, I guess the point I'm making is around just those comments around services that may need to change. Yeah, I'm just signaling my expectation would be that they're considered by ELT before they come to council to sort of pick out of a box which things we would stop.
We need to provide you with options that are evidence-based.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Right, so just before Peter, we'll have Yanni's last question.
We haven't really focused much on the arts and the events, but I guess, I mean, I'm kind of concerned. I'd like to see more events coming back to us as a city, our team to run. I just have more confidence in them than some of the others that are organising them. So I wonder if there's been any consideration to things like the buskers coming back to council. You know, I mean, we used to have an arts festival, the Lantern Festival as well. So is there any sort of, I guess, higher level thinking about the events that we do and what we could do?
Absolutely. To go through, I think what you do have coming back is the event ecosystem presentation with Venues Otatahi, Christchurch and ourselves, in terms to work through that. And part of that might be some decisions for council about whether you would like events to come back to council or otherwise. But that's a presentation that's coming up. But certainly we're working through about what we're trying to achieve out of our events team. And of course, the events team within council delivers community events. And I think they do a great job of that. So we'll continue to work through that. But from the major events, there'll be the event ecosystem presentation will come through as part of this forming the LTP or draft LTP, sorry.
And just wanted to check on the arts stuff. Is it possible to get an understanding, because we don't have any committees anymore that look after arts, but are we able to get an update on what's happened with the art strategy in terms of implementation? So just to get a sense of the things that have been done, the things that haven't been done, and what the challenge and where things are progressing.
Absolutely. I mean, I can send through the most recent quarterly report. Also note that we're coming to council, I think in October, to give an overview of what we have achieved, the Rec and Sport and Events unit for the last quarter. So similar to what we did last year. So that'll be an overview of what we've actually delivered in the last quarter.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Tyler, did you have a very quick?
Just a quick one. You answered a really good. You had a really good answer, but I wasn't quite clear. We're a staff's. What's staff's position on the potential of taking back all of those events that we've been given away over the last 3 years, like the Lantern Festival, etc., CMZ work?
I think you wait until we come through. We'll provide the pros and cons for either internally to go through. So we'll provide the information and options. I don't think we have.
Okay.
We haven't spent enough time with Christchurch and VO to form a view of what our recommendation is yet.
Okay, I support Yanni too. I think council do an amazing job in the event space. So it's really good.
We all agree
Thanks.
on that. We do. Awesome.
Okay.
Right, Nigel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. And Peter is going to come and give us a brief wrap.
Look ahead, heads up on where we're going.
Microphone, Peter.
Sorry, little heads up on where we're going. Next week, there's 4 smaller activities: the Art Gallery, Akara Museum, Customer Services, and Communications and Engagement. So far, you've been through 2 major capital briefings and 16 activities, but those 16 contain the big asset areas. So you've actually probably seen, guesstimate, 60 to 70% of the budget. The 2 big summits coming up, not based on activity views, but the ELT view of options going forward, to your point, Sam, the 17th of October, which is a major session on OPEX, CapEx 3, and disposal of property. And then the 14th of November, infrastructure strategy, finance strategy, resolution of OPEX and CapEx, and fees and charges. So they're smaller chunks with some large blocks in between. And at those 2, I'll just repeat them: 17th of October, 14th of November. They're the sort of major summits around the relationships between services, the rates increase, and the levels of service that have been proposed to you, as well as the capital program. That's just a little sort of reminder of what's coming to your way. So by the middle of November, the plan should be springing into shape.
Wow.
Are there any questions on any of that going forward?
Yes, we have Sarah has a question.
Yeah, thanks. These are really useful, and I'm really glad that that we're able to do them in a more public way this term. I'm just wondering, so each presentation to us goes through ELT.
That's right.
Yeah, which is really good, and making sure everything sits well there. It just surprised me to find out process-wise that it wasn't also being run past the Mayor and Head of Finance Committee before coming to Council, because I know that that's, you know, last term and the term before that would have happened. Yeah, it's just the whole, yeah.
Okay. I guess the answer to that is possibly as simple as logistics, because we are struggling to get these to you by the Friday before these meetings.
Yeah.
So this information would have gone to you last Friday sometime in the afternoon around noon.
Yeah.
And that's actually quite a difficult thing for us to do. If we were to pass them through one or more additional layers, the process will become quite slow. So I don't recall that we did that last time by going through those additional ones. They came straight to committee. So
no, I think we'd heard, yeah, there was an extra step or a heads up at least space in through there.
Okay.
Last term. So yeah.
I can't really answer that. Although not just the logistics, but there's also the transparency angle. I mean, we were trying to bring these in a level playing field to everybody at the same time.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. I'm just aware of the, you know, the Local Government Act requirements and stuff as well, that this should be guided by, if you like, you know, the senior members.
Well, definitely any decision making. You're right. Under the Act, yeah, any decision making needs to be guided by the Mayor and Council. These briefings are, without being too technical about it, they're not actually decision-making sessions.
Right, absolutely.
So,
yeah. And so what guidance is being taken from these? So we haven't been asked for any guidance for an iterative process through these briefings so far. So I'm just wondering how the guidance is coming through.
Well, the guidance on capital, we have had some through the first 2 sessions, and obviously that'll get to the sharp end when we do capital 3, which is the staff recommended capital program based on the advice from the first 2 briefings. And that's going to be a much reduced program. And that's when we really will be looking for final guidance on what's in and what's out. And the same goes for OPEX. The teams are presenting their view by activity, but the joined up holistic view with, as Sam said, what's the ELT vision and recommendation across them really does come from those big summits,
yeah,
rather than piecemeal by activity.
So when I've looked back and rewatched the recordings from the last few, especially in the transport space, I haven't seen any request for guidance. There's been questions asked and answered, but there's been no guidance from from the council as a whole for the direction that they were wishing things to
Hang
go
on,
in.
I think Lynn might want to.
So perhaps I can add, I think Lynette was really, really clear that there's quite a lot of work still to be done.
I'm talking about the process, though, the looking at notes and guidance. So while there's an iterative process that goes back and forwards, what I'm not seeing is where the council guidance space sits in any of these. So for example, today on waste, we had lots of questions and answers, but we didn't as a group give guidance for what to bring back next time, any of those kind of things. It was just question and answers, and we heard from a couple of people. So I'm wondering how guidance is taken into account.
So I think the main
program.
opportunity will be when we actually are able to present to you the full program.
Yeah.
And that's the logical point at which guidance will be sought. Because at the moment, having a look at all the vertical components, I think the Q&A process has been quite helpful. It's been socialising some of the key risks and issues. However, what we now need to do is to present to you a considered view, which will elicit feedback and guidance. And to the point of the transport briefing, just to reiterate, Lynette was really, really clear that she'd still got quite a lot of work to do. So it would have been premature to have asked for guidance at that particular point until we got to a point where there is a more fulsome process for looking at the transport portfolio as a whole.
Yeah, just unclear on the process though. So at the very beginning of that presentation, there was a very clear statement about the fact that presentation was based on guidance that had been given. And I just wasn't sure where that guidance had come from, because I watched the previous transport one and that guidance wasn't there. So if we could work through the process and how that works, I put a question through. That would be really good so that we can make this a proper process. Yeah.
I can chip in a little bit there. The work you've seen was given a very hard steer at the beginning by the strategic priorities and by input from, for example, the board plans. So there's a whole raft of things that have come into the heads of as a funnel to say, you need to focus on this, to deliver a proposal based on these principles. So that's what they've done. And really they're looking for any showstopper moments, but the hard questions will come up, as Lynn says, in the big summits when we look at what everything adds up to and where we might need to make adjustments and get your guidance on those adjustments.
You could look at it like we're actually in the process now of receiving all the information, and then it would be inappropriate in a way to proffer an opinion because it's looking at an I want rather than what's possible at the moment. So as we work through it, then we do the kind of like trade-off and what the direction of the governors around this table would like to be delivered over what is not.
Yeah, except that what we've just been told is that all of those things fit into the proposals. But what we heard at that, the previous briefing, was that there'd been direction given to put one thing above everything else. And I don't recall council giving that direction. So I just trying to work out how that process works.
No, that's good, Sarah, thanks. Sam, did you want to comment?
I mean, noting they're still publicly recorded, which I guess is part of it. Just to allay Sarah's concerns, that the mayor's been very, very clear when he's talked with Pauline and I that actually it makes sense for all this information to come to everyone at the same time, so there's no inference that something has been given. So the guidance that, if I could just finish this here. So the guidance that's been given is the letter of expectation from the LTP, and like Peter said, the board plan. So I would hate to think that for any moment that there's for any reason that someone has, and I guess the cycleways is the point of contention, or where it's come from, but actually that's the staff have worked on that. So it's not something, no one sat in an office and said, get rid of that. They've read the letter of expectation that was unanimously agreed and drawn their own conclusion. But I guess the point that I sort of took from what Lynn was saying at the beginning was that, I mean, I've taken these LTP sessions more as an upskilling for the new councillors more than anything. And I guess once there's a draft put together by ELT, that actually that's when the trade-offs and the changes are made. So we're very, very early on. But I just hate for anyone to have the impression that the mayor and I are certainly looking at stuff, because the guidance he gave at the beginning was that everyone should see it at the same time.
No, that's really good to know. Thanks. I mean, to be clear, I don't have any problems with actually you and the mayor doing that, because actually that's the role of the mayor, is to lead the LTP. I have no problems if things come through. So,
sorry, I obviously wasn't clear. The point is, we're not at that stage where guidance is given. This is information off a letter of expectation that the staff are generating. So it would be inappropriate now to give guidance, even as the mayor. And Phil's been very, very clear on that from the beginning.
Yep.
So I would just hate, given these are recorded, that people would get an impression that isn't correct.
Yeah, so it's really important to reinforce this is not decision making. We've made no decisions to date. Tyler and then Yanni.
I'm all good. I just wanted to clarify that there's a pretty, like Sarah said, there's a pretty clear statement, and it was just that shocked me, because it was the complete opposite of what was proposed around the letter of expectation and the strategy around the long-term plan. A green livable city, I think it was a green cultural powerhouse or something like that, I can't remember, which seemed contradictory to what was proposed. That's why it was flagged to me and was quite a surprise at best.
Could be in conflict with quite a few community board
Exactly.
plans as
So
well.
yeah, with the way that thanks Peter for your work. I don't want you to be the meat in the sandwich, but with the way that we're going towards a long-term plan strategy, we're actually contradicting that by the proposed thing around the transport unit.
I think it's really important for us to take a step back. A green livable city is one of the outcomes and goals. There are also other goals which include a prosperous city. So these are some of the trade-offs that will come through when you see the proposed approach. So please don't take any presentation so far as being definitive or predetermined or even a proposal. These are initial drafts. More work has to be done. And these are the debates that you as councillors are going to be making. Is it more important to have a green livable city or potentially a prosperous, economically outstanding city? You know, these are the things that are implicit in some of the proposals that are coming forward. At the moment, ELT and staff do not have a view. Okay, so there will be plenty of opportunity to have those trade-off debates.
Let me be really clear that I don't think that staff have any views as such. And I just wanted to just reiterate that. And the same thing goes for Sam, the mayor, and etc. I don't think there's anything like that, but I was just surprised to see going from one level to another. Just a noting that was a surprise. So,
okay, right. So Yanni, then Tyrone.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought the staff presented that they wanted to spend more on public transport to get a more clean, green city, and that was that they just didn't have the capacity to do everything at once, and because government had put the PT funding up, that they had certain timeframes where they had to deliver that, which was why they made the suggestion. So I didn't take it to be the trade-off between a prosperous city or a green city. Actually, I thought staff were saying if you want the government investment into public transport, we need to do that first. And so that would certainly go towards that goal. But the question around process I had for these, because I was a little bit unclear that there would be kind of delay around these being public, but if we wanted these sessions to be in public, which, you know, I think some of us may and some of us may not, what would be the process for us to consider moving forward, that not just the live stream, but actually these workshops are just public, so that the information is live in real time. If people have, you know, concerns or questions, they can see it.
Yeah, I know,
on,
but
on
we
the
have
day
had
rather
those
than
discussions, Yanni, and we've decided that.
Also, the question was around the process.
Best forum that we have this forum live streamed, but we release it the next day.
But I'm just trying to understand, given like sort of I guess what's happened and you know through a whole bunch of, you know, over the annual plan as well. Why would we continue to go down that path? Like, what would be the process for us to get that reconsidered?
Can I just say that what would be is getting the councillors together and saying this is what you would like to change the process, which we all agree to. That's absolutely fine, and that would be the process. So if you get agreement around the table, I'd imagine
so notice of motion
with obviously talking with ELT, because there is a process and time and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that would be the process, and yeah.
Yep. So we'll take that offline. And Tyrone, did you have a quick question?
I've just got a question for Lynn really quickly, because I'm very slightly confused that livability and prosperity are traded off against each other? Aren't they? Are they mutually exclusive?
Good question. They are not, but they're examples of some of the, if we look at a holistic vision for our city, a city of opportunity, and people's interpretation of both that and the strategic priorities can differ. So there will be opinions expressed. There are different evidential bases for some of the underpinnings. I didn't mean to say that it was as cut and dried as that, but there will be different perspectives that people will bring to the decision making, and we welcome that.
Excellent. Right, well, that brings us to the end of our briefing this morning, and we are back at oh, okay, we could do that now. We've got time for an informal discussion. Oh, we are here.